The purpose of this video is to review the functionality of the Safety and Attendance tool. This tool is used to document the patient's 15-minute safety checks on the behavioral health unit. The first thing that you need to do is create a patient list, as this will drive the patients that pull into this tool. And then to access the tool, you'll go up into your organizer and select the Safety and Attendance button. After selecting the Safety and Attendance button, it will bring you to this page where you'll be prompted to select your patient list. And if you've newly created a patient list since you've been on this page, make sure you refresh the screen to see the most up-to-date available patient lists. Once you've selected the appropriate patient list from the drop-down, click Submit, and then this will pull in all of your patients on the list. The next thing I'm going to go over is the layout of this tool. So as you can see, each row represents a specific patient, and then we have columns as well that provide additional information about each patient. The first column is the location column, and you're able to sort the patients in your list by the location. And as you can see, the first text before the / is the unit, and then it lists their room and then their bed. You can also have the option to click on the patient's name, and that will link you out into their chart if you need to do additional documentation. Below their name, there's some basic demographic information, including their gender, year or age, and date of birth. It also lists the MRN and FIN number as well. There's a level of observation label at the bottom, and that is not configured currently to pull in any information, so that will never show the patient's true level of observation. The suicide and fall risk column will specify whether or not the patient is a fall risk, a suicide risk, or both. As you can see, when patients have the suicide risk assessment documented on them, they will have their risk level pull in as well to this tool. When the risk level is low, there's no icon showing next to the suicide risk label. When there's a moderate suicide risk, there's a yellow triangle that is displayed next to the suicide risk label, and then with the high suicide risk, there's the red triangle. Whenever a patient scores a 45 or greater on the Morse fall risk, the fall risk text will show in this column as well. So this patient has a Morse fall score greater than or equal to 45 and a high suicide risk documented in their chart. And you're able to see that from directly on this page. The columns over here represent the different documentation time intervals, starting with the most recent and current time interval first. So as you can see, the current time is 5:47, and that's why the time interval of 5:46 to 6 a.m. is the furthest to the left right here. So if we were to document the patient's current location and do an environment check, we would document from this column right here. The previous 15-minute interval column is to the right, and every subsequent 15-minute interval is to the right of that. You can control the time range in which you can view on this page. It is default to 4 hours, and you can have it up to 12 hours. So as you can see, there's a column for the documentation of the time interval between 1:46 a.m. and 2 a.m. as that was 4 hours ago. The next thing I'm going to go over is how to actually document the patient safety check. So to document the patient's current location, you would simply just click on the box where it says click to add. You'll see that there's two tabs. First is the patient location, and based on the patient's location, you'll select the appropriate option from the list. If the patient is in a location that is not on this list, you'll have the option of free text in a location down here by Other. And then for the environment checks, you just need to select Done, confirming that you performed the environment checks. Once you're done documenting the patient's safety and attendance, click OK, and then that will show up light green on the table. The idea is that you'll document each patient's location and environment check going down the list, documenting the appropriate items. After you've documented on all the patients in your list for the given interval, you can go ahead and click Sign Changes to Chart. And once you've signed the changes, the light green boxes will turn into a darker green, and the text will turn white, indicating that you've signed those documentation pieces. There's a couple of shortcuts that I want to show you that are good for two different scenarios. The first one is if the patient is in the same location for a time longer than 15 minutes, you're able to document the previous activity within one click, which will save you time from needing to document both items. So if the patient is still in group when the 5:16 to 5:30 interval comes around, you'd simply click to add the documentation, and rather than going and finding the appropriate item in the list, you can simply choose Use Previous Activity, and that'll pull in the most recent activity documented. The next shortcut that I want to show you is useful especially at night when multiple patients are in the same location. So if you wanted to document that the patient's sleeping in their bed, you would simply choose all the patients that you want to apply that documentation to, and then document that the patient is in bed sleeping as though you were documenting on a single patient. However, when you click OK, you'll see that the documentation is applied to all the patients that you selected in this column over here. This prevents you from needing to go in and choosing that each patient is in their bed sleeping individually. The next thing I want to go over is uncharting an event. So if you unintentionally documented on this patient when you intended for it to go on to a different patient, or if you documented the patient's location for the wrong time interval, you can unchart that documentation by going in and selecting whatever time interval you want to modify. And then you have this Unchart All option that you'll select, and then the documentation turns dithered out, and then the last thing you'll need to do is click Sign Changes to Chart. Once you do that, the box will be documentable again by having the Click to Add option in the box. The last thing I'm going to show is where this documentation lives in iView. So if you're documenting the patient's vitals and things of that nature, sometimes it's easier to just document the patient safety check at that time rather than going back into this tool. To do that, you'll need to go into iView, and you need to have either the BH Adult Consolidated View Navigator Band or the Security Checks Navigator Band in your iView. Both navigator bands contain this individual observation record documentation piece. As you can see, when I click on this, it'll show all the documentation that has been done on this patient using the Safety and Attendance tool. If we were to document the patient safety check from this tool, we would choose the appropriate options just like we would if we were documenting anything else in iView. And then we click the green check mark to sign the documentation. And as you can see, our documentation done in iView will flow into this view as well.